So we're a couple months, about 3 months almost to the day removed from Empath. I mean, looking back at this record, I mean, I've watched some interviews that you've done, I've read up on it a little bit, and you've talked in previous interviews that a lot of this record was about investigating your relationship that you have with your emotions, and it was a very complex project that you did with this. Going in, was that something that you wanted to do, or did that kind of, organically happen?
Well, I think it organically happens, but I also had consciously kind of set an agenda for myself very early in the process and defined that objective. And but it was like one of these things with like all the records where you're just kind of at the behest of where you're going to go anyway, right? So I just kind of follow where the signs led, and that was it. And it was, like you say, it was a challenging thing, and I don't think I had recognized going into it that as my objective would be as challenging as it ended up being.
With that going in, what did you find about that relationship that maybe you weren't aware of going in that you found after it was all over, looking back at the final product?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I think first and foremost is how much fear I feel I had of myself and of my creative process. And I don't know if I had recognized that going in. I mean, I think I was aware on some level that I was afraid of certain things, but I didn't expect most of those things just to sort of be so directly associated with my own trip and my own, trajectory up to this point. So digging into it became, it wasn't like an obsession, but it was certainly like a compulsion. It's like once you start picking at the scab, you kind of got to get rid of it, right?
Right.
So I think that's kind of what happened. And it was by the end of the record where I recognized just how much I had bit off trying to articulate that. It was a big project, man.
Right, and I mean, this is just solo-wise, not counting Strappin', not counting, Devin Townsend, just as Devin Townsend. I mean, you've done, 18 or so solo albums, just you. I mean, there's been a lot of records. I mean, with that much, even counting Strapping, all the other projects you've done, how did, just the experience of songwriting help you through that process when it started to get tough? And I would assume maybe even maybe even unbearable to keep going with this.
Yeah, at times I'll have to agree with that for sure, man. And I appreciate the acknowledgement of it too.
Sure.
To be fair, I mean, I think because I've done so much work, and I even listened back to what I did in Ziltoid and like the first Ziltoid record, which at that time I thought was kind of a technical achievement for me. It was done on a real small amount of gear and on my laptop and what have you. But when I compare what I was doing a decade ago to what I'm doing now, the amount that I've learned just in terms of production, and the production part of it as well plays into the songwriting, like the amount that I've learned has made it so that I don't have to focus on that much anymore. Like I got patterns and I've got techniques, and as long as my computer's functioning relatively well, that's no longer a part of my mental process. I can kind of do that automatically. And so that freed me up songwriting-wise, arrangement-wise, production-wise, to focus more on what the meat of the concept was, as opposed to having an idea and then having to go on online forums trying to figure out how to articulate that,
Sure. And
I did try, like I started working in Logic and Ableton more on Empath. And what I found interesting is I would assume, I know a bunch of people that speak English as their second language, and they do it fairly well, but clearly it's, easier for them to be really forthright with their thoughts in their own native language. And I feel the same way about that with DAWs. I'm so proficient at Pro Tools that although I wish it was those other programs because they do cool things, when I really need to just hammer a point home, I've got to be in Pro Tools at this point.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Right, and musically, listen to this record. I mean, just the overall musical approach that you took and feeling of the record really takes me back to the Retinal Circus, because I freaking love that project and that show. There's a lot, just with the choirs and everything on it. I mean, it really takes me back to that a little bit, but it also kind of goes full circle a lot with every sound that you've had throughout your career. Was that something that you really want to do, or with so many records and projects you've done, is that kind of inevitable at this point?
Well, I mean, hindsight makes all these things look intentional, you know, but as I'm working on a project like this, I'm really scrambling in the dark, and I just keep poking until I find like a weak spot, and then that's the direction I go, right? And so that just ended up including, as part of the emotional process, the desire to sort of make an assessment of what my relationship is with each particular part of my creative past, and that just played also into the idea of emotions and empathy in a sense that worked well as well. You know, it's, you've got all these different sounds and all these different styles and what have you. You can attribute different emotional values to each, right? But yeah, man, it was a thing.
Gotcha. And I mean, you just recently wrapped up a run. You were out with Avatar for a little bit there, 68, all those guys, which I feel that you were individually a good fit for that tour, because I mean, stylistically there's a few similarities between your stuff and Avatar's, but you did some. Was every set on the tour an acoustic set for you, or just a few?
Yeah, every set. And I remember, I've got so many things coming up that I remember prior to that Avatar tour thinking like, okay, you just got to buckle up and get through this one.
Gotcha.
And not necessarily because of anything other than, dude, you try and crowbar acoustic music in between a bunch of heavy bands.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
You're constantly in this kind of state of amber alert. You know, there's like hecklers or it's just loud or what have you. And although I can deal with that, it's not optimal.
Right.
And so, although there were, like you say, some stylistic similarities between myself and some of the bands, and I got along with everybody on the tour. What a great group of people! Just full stop. Everybody on that run was great. But it also helped me to make some decisions about my future, and I realized that in the beginning, that tour seemed like it was an appropriate one because, you know, I didn't have to have any crew, and I was on their bus, and overhead was low, and I could, you know, make some money and have some time to think and all this sort of thing. I realized pretty quick into the process that I just don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to open for people anymore. And that's not necessarily based on me thinking that I'm beyond that, as much as just, I don't think I have to be honest. I think I have an audience that will support certain things like that, like, you know, solo acoustic things or whatever, without having to be, like I say, on amber alert and always have to be like, okay, well, how am I going to diffuse this loudmouth in the corner here or whatever, right?
There's always going to be that one that didn't realize it was an acoustic set and comes in and says, where's the electric, man? Come on, you know.
Well, and plus, it's like, I was the oldest guy on that tour. Like, that's the first time that's ever happened. Like, of anybody on that tour, I was the oldest guy on the tour, and I was just like, how the fuck did this happen, man? I was the youngest guy.
Avatar's a new band, and 68's got Josh, but he's been around for a while, but he's still relatively...
He's still in his 30s.
I mean, yeah, I guess...
Still in his 30s, man.
That. I mean,
well, and it's also funny, like, a lot of these bands, I found out when I was out there, like, oh yeah, we've been listening to what you've done since we were kids. And I'm just like, holy shit. So it was a lot of learning that went into it, and it was a really cool experience on a personal level.
Right.
But it was good for me on a business level because I was just like, oh, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, like, I want to, the next tours that I do in North America are going to be a real kind of special thing for me. And I think it's about time that I focus on trying to make some headway as a headliner here, as opposed to taking tours because they're convenient, right?
Right, and I was going to ask. I mean, shortly before at one point before the Avatar tour, you did the Evening with tour over in Europe, which was, I think, probably it was an acoustic approach as well. Did that have any influence on doing the acoustic set on the Avatar tour, or were those separate kind of decisions?
Yeah, they're separate decisions. Although the process is similar, acoustic guitar and some computer stuff. The difference is a captive audience. Like the acoustic tour was like the entire thing sold out, right?
Yeah.
And next is Australia and China and Dubai and all these things, and because it's a more captive audience, people tend to be really quiet and it's seated, and I can talk and play and on a good night, I mean, you can hear a pin drop, and that's great for me creatively.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's very different because, I go out, we're playing at like Pops in Sauget, Illinois. You know what I mean? There's like a strip club on either side, and it's 140 degrees out. And
yeah, Trixie's in Louisville. I mean, it's the same way.
Yeah, White Rabbit or whatever that place was is no longer there. It's like, but you can imagine a Friday night, like, you get up there with an acoustic guitar and a couple stuffed animals or whatever, and people are just like, nope, no thanks.
Yeah.
So the process became a lot more antagonistic for me. Like, I felt like, okay, well, in order to win these people over, it can't just be me playing music. I'm going to have to kind of walk it a little bit. And and I did.
Well, and in Europe on the Evening with, I mean, it was Evening with Devin Townsend. It was there. People were there specifically to see. You weren't opening for Avatar and trying to win over Avatar's fans or 68 are Dead or whatever. It's like they're there. They know what they're coming in to see, and they've already got their questions right. They're there to engage, and I mean, Avatar shows are insane. I mean, oh my God, those are.
Yeah, and I also found what was interesting about it as well is there's a certain amount of crossover, but not a ton, and less than I thought was to be. And so, what ended up happening in some cases is that people would come out to see my trip, and then just be like, man, I wish this was a quieter venue. I wish it was like this and that and the other thing, and. It was a bit of an arm wrestle, I have to admit. But I also remember, like I said, before the tour started, going, okay, well, I just got to grind through this one because I need to get out there and I need to promote the record in America, and I'm just not ready to put a band together yet. So this seems like the best possible scenario, like in terms of traveling comfort and whatever. And and overall, it was successful. Like, I mean. Overall, it was successful, but it was not, like, effortless.
Well, and I was going to ask, on Empath, you have a lot of guests that you worked with, wrote with, played with on this record. Some that you've worked with a few times or are familiar with, and some not so many. I mean, going in, did you kind of have a list of who you wanted to work with, or or did it just kind of pop up, hey, I think I want to work with Chad, or, I've worked with Steve. That went really well. I mean, how did you narrow it down to who really ended up on this record with you and working with you?
Well, again, I mean, I can answer almost all these questions if I wanted to in a way that made it seem like this was all like a premeditated, well thought out plan.
Right.
But it's easier for me just to be honest and say things just happen. Like, I've been working with Steve for years, clearly, and Keneally just kind of came into my life, and we had done some writing separate from Empath, and then we had contacted each other about doing it again. I said, well, look, man, at this particular point in my world, I've written this Empath record, and I'm much more interested in doing that than writing something new, but he's a brilliant musician and a brilliant mind, so I was like, if you want to come up, and act as almost like, second brain in the room. We could have some fun with this material that's already there, and give me some production advice and things. And then I guess because Keneally and Steve had worked together for so long, Mike had talked to Steve about how he was really happy with the project in general, and Steve sent me a mail asking. He said, "Hey, if you want a guitar solo, let me know." And it's Steve Vai, right? As much as I've got a relationship with him and he's a buddy, it's like you don't get mails like that particularly often. So I was like, yeah. In fact, the guy that was going to do it was going to be Vernon Reed, because I had become friendly with him. But we just couldn't seem to, emails between us just seemed to like get lost in the void. So it kind of fell by the wayside. And then Steve stepped in, and then Chad was just another strange coincidence where we kind of become friendly with each other and spent a bunch of time hanging out. And I recognized there was a lot of similarities between our creative process, and just his involvement with me was incredibly enlightening for me, because I, for whatever reason, had assumed prior to my meeting with him that making popular music was like a choice that you could make as a musician, as opposed to, no, the reason he makes that music is because that's the dude that he is. Like he is type A alpha dog, you know what I mean? Like assertive rock star.
Right.
And so that's why he makes that music. And all the effort that, maybe you and I would spend trying to replicate that level of success by writing something similar is always going to fall flat, because it's not coming from the same place. I didn't realize until I met him that, the process that produces things like Singularity for me is the same thing it produces How You Remind Me for him, right? And I didn't know that. It just kind of blew my head off in a weird way. And so that helped me make some creative decisions that were based more in what was right for the project. And so when it came time for Hear Me, I just thought it would be funny. Like, hey, I'm doing this death metal throwback to SYL. Would it be great if Chad was on? And so things just kind of happen, and there's no premeditating on that, like, for real.
Right, and I mean, with Chad and Nickelback in general, I mean, they get a lot of shit, but if you sit down and listen, they've got some good songs, and honestly, some
great songs,
some pretty heavy stuff. They've got some heavy shit too. I mean, they can throw
production.
Yeah,
dude, the production's second to none too. I didn't realize until I met with him too. He's a scrappy dude. Like, it's I'm not a fighter, physically. I have zero interest in being in physical altercations if I can avoid it, right? And and I'm pretty, I like meditation and yoga and and veganism and all this kind of hippie shit. Yet I'm sort of strapping and all this stuff. People are like, oh yeah, you're the heavy metal guy. You're the super brutal guy. And in fact, when I first met Chad, that was kind of the impression he had too. He's like, oh, you do all this brutal stuff. And then about an hour into it, I was like, dude, you're way more brutal than I am. Way more brutal. Dude, I make that type of music because, I'm just overly sensitive. And so it's my reaction to fucking intensity is to make intense music.
Yeah.
But I'm not like dude, I'm like the opposite of the typical stereotype of heavy metal.
Yeah, I feel like it's actually that way with a lot of us that are in heavy metal in general. Like, it's such a heavy genre that everyone's like, oh, I'm like, you'd be surprised how many people I've talked to in singers and bands, and it's like, you go into the dressing room and it is not. It's just very calm, cool, laid back, just very, very cool.
Well, dude, that's the thing. I think that, because all the Nickelback is, like, heavier. And it's funny. It's like, him in my life just means that, of course, I knew going into it I was going to be asked about it a lot, but just, it's like, every time I say something about it, it's like, it's like, Devin says this about a famous guy, right? So,
right.
I appreciate that. But at the same time, I will say, dude, that guy's life is way more brutal than mine's ever been. Way more brutal, dude. Like, like between parties and drinking or drugs or women or whatever. I mean, dude, I never lived that life, ever.
Right.
That whole Motley Crue thing, dude, I missed it entirely.
Right.
You know what I mean? Maybe that's why I was so brutal back when I was doing Alien or City or something, just because I was pissed off about that. I don't know.
Maybe.
You know what I mean?
And talking about having kind of just a calm life and kind of not living that party lifestyle, one thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's definitely affected me in a lot of ways, but how did having a family and having kids affect your touring life and your creativity, the way you write, and just the way you do this in general? It affects it.
Well, I remember seeing a psychiatrist a while back, and I forget what it's for, but just just kind of sort of get a checkup after my life just being crazy, to keep myself on a semblance of even ground, right? And after I told him about my life and what I do for a living, and dichotomy between the fucking intensity of it and kids and all these things, the guy's just like, "How haven't you gone crazy yet?" And I was like, "Oh, I have, for sure." But I think that speaking well of myself, I think I've managed to find some mechanisms to suppress that the psychosis that clearly comes from being in fifth on the freeway and then just slamming it in reverse for 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Like, because your brain is just like, fuck, and people, people close to your family or friends, and they have no frame of reference for it. It's like, "How you doing, man?" I'm like, "Fine. Everything's just great."
Yeah. Like, "How are you?" "I'm here. I'm alive."
I don't know what to tell you.
Nobody's died. We're good. I'm here. So.
Well, I think that's helped the music too. It's forced me to kind of just accept how things are in my life, because for years, being such a controlling kind of dude, I tried to have some sort of semblance of control over my life, but I can't. So, maybe it manifested somewhere along the line as I make my bed every morning and keep my sock drawer clean, and maybe in some sense I feel like my life is falling into place as a result of that routine. But all told, man, you kind of gotta roll with it. You just gotta surf it. I think that's what I've done.
So Eras is a really interesting project. It's kind of a long-term project as well for you. It's a very, very complex box set. What made you want to put that together, and how much of a hand do you have in that? And is it fun to kind of go back and revisit some of this stuff and look back at it where you are now? Because part 4 comes out in August.
Yeah, and I'd love to do a 5th one too with the bonus stuff.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Track version. I just had to send a mail to the label because I've been meaning to tell them that, and I keep forgetting, so this is a good reminder. Yeah, I'm involved with it, absolutely. To the extent that I'm able to right now. Inside Out has been great. Inside Out has been great for me because they allow me to be as involved or
that's awesome.
uninvolved as I want, and typically I want to be completely involved. I mean, I think the only thing that I didn't have a direct hand in this time, although I had to okay it and all that, is just the physical layout of the box set. But the booklet and the box itself is really a good quality, and I'm satisfied with it. So it allows me to kind of have the entire catalog of material organized into one sock drawer, basically. And they did the same thing with strapping, with Blood Music. We've got all the strapping stuff, and although I'm under no illusions that the music that I do is forever, I do like being able to sort of take stock of it. So if there are people who are new to what I do, they can sort of have it all in one place and say, "Oh, okay, shit, there's like 30 years of output here." So
yeah, definitely.
Anyway, we're gonna have to wrap it up pretty quick here, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's cool.
Let's see it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, last question. Going to Europe in the fall and winter, how much fun is that going to be to finally go out again, kind of headlining and just revisiting over there again?
Well, currently it seems like it's a pain in the ass, just because I've been rolling on my own now for the past 4 months, and it's been really lovely.
Right.
So the idea of like being back out and the social engineering and the costs and all this sort of stuff that go into it are like, but there has been moments more recently, and now that the acoustic tours are starting to sort of wrap themselves up, where I realize I'm like, okay, I'm getting a little tired of just this, and it would be great to do that. There's going to be there's 2 things that I'm planning in the immediate future. One is this November tour in Europe, which is 10 people on stage me.
Yeah.
Like the songs that I want to play without click tracks or backing tracks. It's going to be very selfish tour for me.
Right.
But then after that, starting in the next year when the festivals and North American tours start,
Awesome.
I do something different, and I'm actually going to do something that's my entire catalog, and that includes strapping as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So so basically what I'd like to do is, because I've been offered a bunch of like headline slots at festivals, and I'm like, okay, well, how do I make myself like a viable headliner for these things?
Sure.
And as opposed to, improv and artsy-fartsy sorts of things, which I love doing, why don't we just, like, take the catalog and get the ones that just make just a totally kick-ass set from everything.
Yeah.
And then just get the best sound that you can, best players that you can, and just hit the shit out of it, right? Yeah. So that'll be next year, and I'm really looking forward to that.